She thinks you're about the biggest guy sitting up here. Next week.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and call the 2012 committee meeting to order. First item on the agenda is roll call and determination. Charlene.
Peterson? Reifenbach?
Here.
Davis?
Here.
Adcock? Here. Kroger?
Here.
Costello?
Here.
Quaker?
Here.
Waugh?
Here.
Brown?
Here.
Mason?
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you, Charlene. The only item on the agenda is a request of $50,000 from Phase 3 Vision 2012 funding to be allocated to the Parkview Tennis Court restroom project.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second for approval. Discussion on that motion. I'm going to ask Jerry Cole to come up and Jerry, would you just give us a little history of what these dollars in the original 2012 plan for Phase 3 were going to be used for? Jerry.
Thank you, Mr. President. Phase 3 2012 funding for the skate park was implemented back in 2004. And if you recall, at that time, the kids were using the graveled surface or the dirt surface. They were driving up a handicap ramp. And so originally the funds were looked at for the parking in that area. After the funds, parking and then a restroom as well. After the funds were allocated, the Civic Center came forward and said they were going to look at doing that parking over there. So we waited for almost 3 years at that time at the New York Skate Park, utilizing porta potties for our restrooms. And finally, we got to a point where the porta potty companies wouldn't bring their restrooms over to us anymore because they were getting destroyed. At that point, when the Civic Center completed their parking, the Parks and Recreation Board said, we don't have enough money in that fund to do the full restroom over there. And so they decided against that project to say, you know, we don't think that it is a good idea to put a restroom there because it's going to be just like the porta potties and it's going to get destroyed. We're going to put $200,000 in a restroom and it's going to get destroyed. And they felt it wasn't a good idea at the time.
Okay, so if I understand it correctly, is we have $150,000 in this fund. And at this point in time, we don't have enough money to fund, even if we wanted to, a restroom for the skate park. Is that correct?
We would have to probably come up with some more money. It'd be close to $200,000.
Okay. So one way or another, we're short on doing either project.
Correct.
Okay. Discussion on the motion on the floor. Gordon.
Thank you, Chairman. Just curious, so essentially we're going to be taking money that would have originally be allocated to the skate park restroom and reallocating it here, or am I misunderstanding that?
Originally it was for parking, and then it was moved over to a restroom. And at this point in time, we do not have enough money to do a restroom for the skate park. So we're going to be short on either project.
Right. Is it possible at all to look at the 2012 contingency?
You know, we can certainly do that. The contingency that we implemented isn't going to be basically there until like maybe the third year of the 2012 project that we got going. But I mean, there is some additional funds. So I guess the answer to your question probably would be is if at a point in time they come forward to do a restroom at the skateboard park, we could look at it at that point in time to see where the additional funds would be in 2012.
Thank you. I guess I'm looking at this and I understand that there's unfortunately been some problems, but in those obstacles, I guess I see some opportunities, and I also see a community need that doesn't just apply to the skate park. I guess I've seen a lot of people at Hills Alive and other events that are in need of those facilities and those types of facilities, especially because of the distance. Thank you.
Jerry, did you have another comment?
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, sir. Also, since 2004, when this money was implemented, we also started implementing skate parks around the city. That was our only central skate park at the time. We now have a skate park at Thompson Park and at Stevens High School, and which we operate. Neither of those have bathroom facilities either. And what has happened is it taken the group, the centralized skateboarding park, and has dispersed the number of people that were using it in 2004 down. So there are now skate parks around the city.
Thank you, Jerry. Any other comments? Bonnie Peterson.
Thanks. Yeah, I share concerns too that I think that it would be good to have a facility there. But I guess we could, I'm assuming that your need for the tennis court repair is much more pressing as far as your priorities are concerned. That's what this money's for, isn't it?
Actually, there was a bid of $250,000 for this restroom, and my understanding is the city had put in $50,000, the tennis association had put in $50,000, and the school had put in $100,000. Or 50?
Yeah,
Originally.
The proposal now is that the schools and the city would each pitch in an additional $50,000.
Okay, okay.
Okay. I don't know. It's hard to believe that you can't build a bathroom facility for that much money, especially. But anyway, I was just wanting to express my concerns about that because I do think it would be good to have facilities there to meet multiple needs. Thanks.
Thank you. Sam?
Thank you. I remember when this original discussion occurred 6 or 7 years ago, and I understand the need for moving this money, but I do hope that this still stays on the radar screen, and perhaps what we could do, instead of putting a restroom right next to the skate park on New York Street, it could be moved over somewhere, maybe halfway down that parking lot, because then that would benefit everybody that uses that parking lot during large events as well, and also in case we wanted to put events in that parking lot too. So I would just like to keep that on the radar screen. I do support this motion tonight, but I want to make sure that the other option doesn't completely fall off radar. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Deb Hadcock.
When Jordan asked contingency and later, when is later? Are you talking a couple years, or are you talking?
I think, Pauline, when does our contingency for 2012 kick in? Is it like in the third year of this?
I'm bringing it up. I'm sorry. It's a little slow.
Sorry.
I did that.
Mayor got the badge here.
I believe it was 2013, but
I think it actually starts before that. Contingency starts in 2012 with $140,000 for civic improvements and then $140,000 for economic development. For municipal infrastructure, that starts in 2013.
okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that, because I think even for economic, we did talk about this with the mayor about the larger events and the things that are happening, like Hills Live, Stock Show, and putting it over by the skate park was a good idea. We've been waiting for that bathroom over by that skate park for a while, since I've been on the city council 5.5 years. It's not just for a skate park again, it's for many activities that happen around the civic center and on that bike path. And I know for the future, there's some council members working on lighting that bike path with Jerry Cole and some others. And maybe when that project goes, we can think about putting the bathroom in there. Because again, not really in favor of taking that money from this bathroom to do another bathroom. But I know we do have the project at Parkview being finished, where this, we could add to another project, which is lighting the bike path and some stuff that the police department is making positive for us. So if it's 2012, 2013, I think even with economic, we could call it economic development in a certain sense, because that would be helping some of those bigger projects to have a bathroom. So thank you for answering that contingency question, and Jordan for bringing that up. I believe it's a good project. Both of them are, and one's ready to go, so makes sense. Thank you.
Okay, we do have a motion on the floor for approval. Any other discussion on this motion? Being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, meeting's adjourned. Mayor?
Okay, we'll go ahead and call the special council meeting for March 28th, 2011 to order. First thing on the agenda, as always, is the roll call and determination of the quorum. Charlene, if you would.
Peterson. Weifenbach.
Here.
Davis.
Here.
Hadcock. Here. Kroger.
Here.
Costello.
Here.
Quaker.
Here.
Waugh.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Mason.
Here.
We do have quorum.
Very good. As this is a special council meeting, we do have 4 items on the agenda. Please keep in mind we can only discuss those items on the agenda, but they are fairly broad. And with that, since this is a budget discussion, I'm going to turn the meeting back over to the council president, Ron Kroger.
Thank you, Mayor. If everyone would go to their, I guess it's their third sheet, is where we left off, and that was under where is the break between policy making and micromanaging. Is there any discussion on that item? Anyone want to discuss that item? If not, we're going to move on to the next. Okay, we're going to move on to the next item, which is operational restructuring. Jordan?
Thank you. This was actually an item that I brought up under the September 13th meeting, and it was actually just a recommendation to break down when we were discussing actually structuring these items to put it under operational restructuring, subsidies, and debt management for 3 broad categories.
Okay, so this one is basically covered too then. So we'll go on to establish an ongoing fund for the upgrade and maintenance of all city facilities. Jordan?
Thank you. This is actually something that Alderman Waugh had brought up regarding some topics dealing with setting up some funding for, I believe it was an energy policy, if I remember correctly. And it occurred to me that we also have some other facilities, such as mentioned by the mayor a while ago, with an $80 million project for our current water facility that we will need to be looking at some point, and hopefully that our current water plan will cover. However, it has occurred to me that we have other issues such as the landfill and other major facilities in the future that will also need to get a structured plan to replace that as this city moves forward in the next 20 to 30 years. And as such, I guess I would look at the idea of actually establishing an ongoing fund for the upgrade and maintenance of major and critical facilities that are needed for the functioning of the city for the future. And I guess I would entertain some discussion from my peers.
Okay, any other discussion? We'll go to Bill Waugh.
Thank you, Mr. President. When the Energy Committee reviewed the energy policy that was brought up back when I was on the council, and I think we established it in 03 or 04, the current Energy Committee reviewed the current energy policy and really found no major changes to that policy. But the committee did feel that if the city had an energy/facilities manager, we would actually kill 2 birds with 1 stone, whereas we would have somebody to oversee the energy policy, taking that responsibility away from department heads who are very busy anyway, and also under his umbrella putting a facilities manager, and if there was a fund that he would manage that fund also. And what the facility manager would do would be look at all of our inventory, all of our facilities, what type of windows, what type of heating and air conditioning systems, what condition are the roofs in, and start setting priorities of which facilities to work on first. I have no idea how we would fund this fund, but in the energy savings alone, I know we would more than pay for this person's position. And in talking with different folks on staff and the mayor, we currently have an FTE position that we could put this person in. And I think as we get into the budgeting process, this would be a topic of discussion. And if I'm not here, which more than likely I won't be, when we really get into the heat of the budget, I would like someone to really take this bull by the horn, because if we can save $300,000 to $500,000 a year in energy savings, plus look at all of our facilities and have some sort of priority list of which facilities need to be fixed first and what's the priorities for different city buildings, I think it would more than pay for this person's position. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Further discussion, we'll go to Gary Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But I think you say you don't know where the funding will go from, but I think that's a discussion that we got to have right up front. How are we going to fund this? Is it going to be a percentage of existing budgets? Is it going to have to be a new separate funding source in that? Just to say that we want an ongoing fund is not fair. We have to have that discussion, I think, first. That'll affect everything else down the line. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We'll go to the mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Alderman Wall, for bringing this up. This is something we've been looking at for about the last 6 months. It will be incorporated into the fiscal year 2012 budget. We do believe we have an FTE, as mentioned, identified for this position. It will probably be transferred from engineering down to community resources. As far as funding, Mr. Brown brings up a very good question, and I guess the short answer would have to come out of existing funding. In other words, and what we would really need to do is make the determination if we want to split those fundings out or if we want to leave those in their traditional cost centers. A good example is the fact that do we want to pull the maintenance and funding out of the library as far as a cost center and accumulate that into one fund, or do we leave those in the individual cost centers? It's one of the things that we're struggling with, and it will have some real good, strong recommendations with the proposed budget. But absolutely, this also goes along not only with facilities management, having one or two people basically overseeing the long-term maintenance and upgrades of all our facilities, but it also goes right along with what we've also been talking about as centralized purchasing, which would also be basically part of this, what I'll call the conversion to more of a universal type of purchasing and maintenance of all of our facilities. So that will be, you will see that actually in the fiscal year 2012 budget with recommendations.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll go to Deb Hadcock.
I think it was Bill Waugh that said based on priorities. I think if we get a priority list and we find out where those categories are, it might be easier to know if we need to start making priorities in CIP, enterprise fund, or where those priorities need to be for this council. So until we get that priority list, what needs to be done, like we had the water treatment plan in 1961, there's a priority. They brought it forward. You need those priorities listed, and we have had many since the last couple of years, actually, based on priority, has been brought forward. But I think it's just easier, even with infrastructure, if we knew, remember with reservoirs and lift stations and some of the private sewer lines, we had Public Works do priorities in those areas, and then we worked on them. So those reservoirs and things are getting done. So I would say based on looking at what those priorities are in Rapid City, if it's the CSAC building first, if it's the energy plant, I mean, we need to know those as city council people, and then I think you can see where that funding sources might need to come from, or where we can prioritize even from CIP on government buildings, because it would be a goal of the council based on those priorities. So it made sense. I think that was Bill that said that, but I'd say once I saw the list, just like we did in Public Works, us, the council members and the mayor made those priorities. So I don't know how we get that done or who we decide. Maybe the mayor can do that with his department heads, is just have them bring some priorities that need to be done then we can do what Jordan said and base it on those, which makes more sense. So,
We'll go back to Jordan Mason.
Thank you. Well, I guess I would just start out by saying that I think this is kind of a discussion in dealing with the funding of are we going to pay now or pay later? And the reason I say that is we can start to accumulate funding now, or we can do as Mayor Alan Hanks depicted in talking about how the policy and the water pay plan actually came to implementation, and that there was a more dramatic and sudden increase in the rates than a gradual increase in rates over time. And I guess what I would entertain for a discussion on the funding would to actually look at the current utility, these water billing and other implementation of current funds that we do have coming in, and look at would it be in the long run and for the future of this city, look at should we start maybe looking at how to increase some of that funding to start putting aside money now, or do we want to look at paying later? And I guess the reason that I would kind of bring this up is that commonly throughout my experiences is that if we pay later, we're looking at the inflationary effects, one and first and foremost, and then secondly, construction costs seem to always considerably increase over time. So I guess I'm kind of looking at, should we start to look in the long run, or do we want to just wait until this comes on down the pipeline? Thanks.
Further discussion will go to Ron Whitenbach.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think that obviously this leads to a good discussion that we need to have, but I think Alderman Hadcock had alluded to the fact that if we knew what our priorities were, we'd have a sense of where we were. So, we can put the cart before the horse, or we can look and see where the necessities are. The city's been in business for quite some time, so our department heads are quite well aware of where their buildings are. I know if you go to the Civic Center Board is looking at some, they kind of know what priorities they need and what they're coming up, and we can set a pace to where we need to be. And I understand Alderman Mason's feelings about, we definitely don't want the golf ball coming down the garden hose where we don't have the political willpower to make the changes if they're necessary to increase fees, or if they are to moving them around in the budget. But I think if we prioritize them, so we have a kind of a clue of what we're looking at, we can make a well-educated decision. So I'm assuming that the people that are working in those buildings have a pretty good idea of what they're looking at. And especially when you have like the library, they have a board, Civic Center has a board, the water department, we're working on those things. So that'd be for what that's worth. Thank you.
Further comments will go to Sam Quaker.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this is a good idea, and thank you, Jordan, for bringing this up. In terms of maybe breaking this off into manageable pieces, maybe one way to look at this from a performance budgeting standpoint and from the standpoint of planning for the future, maybe what we could do is look at carving out the enterprise funds and looking at those first. For example, the situation at the Civic Center and the energy plant. I don't think the community was pleased with how that went down. And I think what we can do is we can ask all the enterprise fund managers, whether it be boards or department heads that manage those particular enterprise funds, to identify what some of those maintenance needs are, and to try to carve out parts of their existing revenue stream, which some I think are doing already, and then bring forward that report to a future meeting. What do you think about that? Trying to break this down a little bit, because this is a big proposal.
Further comments will go to Alderman Mason.
Thank you, and thank you, Alderman Quaker. And I would also like to just point out that this idea started with Alderman Waugh, and I guess I just think it's a brilliant idea and should be discussed. But with the idea of having each department director carve out and make the priority list within their own departments, my only concern is that when somebody's dealing with something on a day-to-day basis, they may find that as far as their perception is, that what they think is the highest priority, they're going to put at the top of the priority list. And I guess I'm looking at a more global picture for the city. So while one department may see this as a priority, it may not necessarily be a critical priority for the whole city as a whole. And I guess that would be my only concern, is that there may be some bias just because of perception in making that priority list. And that would be my only concern, but I do appreciate the idea, especially of carving out the funding, which I think is an excellent idea as well.
Further discussion, Deb Hadcock.
Just a couple things I heard. Based on the department head, I think they do know what's best, and we just take in our list from their list what we think the citizens of Rapid City would be a need, not a want. And I think we've done that in the past. And I also believe, based on looking towards the future, when we did the water rates, actually that was a gradual rate increase. It wasn't all at once. So they did look towards, and this was Public Works, they did look toward the future. They did look toward what would be hopefully more helpful to the citizens of Rapid City when they had to increase that water. I think our Public Works Department did a great job on how they did that. City Council also looked, and with Public Works, on how to save many people money by looking at other ideas for people that needed help with that. So I think when we did the infrastructure for the water, Public Works did a great job of helping all the issues, and they came forth with what our priorities were, what the needs were of the people, and basically what would be the most helpful for that. So that's one example, I think, that we did in the past that actually wasn't a negative, it was a positive, in a sense that how they did it and why we had to do it, because the rates hadn't been increased, for 16 years. So it was a priority of the city. It was a priority of the citizens, in a sense, meaning by what the water part was telling them. We've taken half your water. The DENR took that water. We need it back. Can you help us, citizens? I think a lot of people stepped forward and moved that forward for not only for the city, but as citizens. So we had enough water. That was a futuristic look of how to take care of the city. That was a priority of Public Works and the City Council and the mayor. So I believe the department heads, in this case Jordan Mason, if we see some of those priorities on infrastructure, like the streets, that has been moved forward because the citizens and the City Council and the mayor. There has many things that sometimes the community is smarter than us, in a sense. They'll tell us, and it'll come forward and it'll get done. So I appreciate what you're bringing up, but based on those priorities of those department heads, we've had some really positive things move forward in Rapid City. Thank you.
Further comments, Mayor Hanks?
Thank you. This is a great discussion, but please keep in mind that, and we certainly can expand on the exercise, but we already do priority listing every single year. It's called the CIP fund. You look at each one of those categories, we have 5-year plans as far as maintenance and upgrade of our facilities. Now, when we get large projects like a new water treatment plant, that's typically outside the scope of really what we could afford to do through the CIP. The other thing to keep in mind is the fact that under state statute, you're only allowed to accumulate so much money. There would be no possible way for us over the last 10 or 15 years to accumulate enough money to build a new water treatment plant. State law will not allow you to do it. Because under state law, the enterprise funds are allowed to basically collect enough revenue for operations and maintenance and some limited capitalization. It's not anticipated that you're going to be able to accumulate $40 million in 10 years for a new water treatment plant. State statute won't allow you to do that. That's sort of the dilemma we're in, is because of the fact that we're a government, we're not a typical business. Typical business in the real world could accumulate that kind of money. Governments typically, it's very frowned upon, because what ends up happening is then there's a perception that we're overcharging people for the services we're providing, and the enterprise funds are specifically designed not to generate a profit. They're there to basically pay the expenses and to pay the maintenance and some limited capitalization. So, great conversation, absolutely. Can we do some more identifying as far as issues and so forth? Yes. But in my mind, that's just an expansion of what we're already doing through CIP.
Thank you, Mayor. Further comments go to Jordan Mason.
Thank you. Good timing. Just got donuts. Well, Just to respond to the idea that we're already making a priority listing, I guess my concern is as the mayor pointed out, there are some large projects, as Alderman Quaker pointed out, such as the energy plan earlier this year that came up that are somewhat outside the scope. And I do realize that there is stipulations in the state statute that prohibit us from accumulating this, but I think that with a little creativity here, there is a potential to keep moving forward on this. And back to the priority listing that Alderwoman Hadcock mentioned, I do think it's possible, as we already do, is to look at the priorities of the projects that are coming up, and I would be curious to know if we can actually pay for these items in advance and then actually allocate that funding to pay off a bond that has been used to pay for that item or priority in advance. And I guess I would look to our city attorney to see if that is legally permissible.
Ms. Jason? Jordan, you want to repeat that?
Yes. It was brought up that the state statute prohibits us from accumulating money or limits the ability of capitalization. And I guess what I'm wondering is if we were to set up a priority list of items in the future that need to be done, if we could pay for those in advance and then use the funding source to pay off the bonding that was used to pay for that item, and if that would be legally permissible.
Well, I'm not sure how that would work. If you paid for it in advance with cash on hand, you wouldn't go out for a bond on it. What you've described essentially is exactly the way the CIP program works. The council at one point went out and bonded and is repaying that bond with sales tax dollars. And whatever's not needed to pay off the bond goes to augment the CIP fund.
Right, and I guess I'm looking at using that exact same structure as you described, but using that with a fund that would be for much larger projects, such as, for example, the landfill, when it finally comes to pass, that we will need to expand on that facility or find another location for that facility.
Jason?
Well, I think that when you have a major expense that goes beyond what you can generally pay for out of a year's worth of revenues, bonding is really the only option. That's, the landfill would be a great example of that. When it's time to expand that facility, it's going to be a lengthy and expensive process. The water treatment plants that we did last year, the Jackson Springs and the Mountain View that's upcoming, obviously are more than we would be able to pay for out of a year's worth of revenue. So I think the really only feasible way to do that is to bond for those expenses and pay them off over time through an amortization type schedule.
Thank you. Well, with that information, it seems as if that really isn't a hindrance to setting up a way of getting an ongoing fund for, as the mayor stipulated, things that fall outside the scope of the current CIP for major events. So, I guess I see a lot of, I do understand there are some obstacles here, but as stated before, I guess I'm a bit of an optimist here, but I think we can turn these obstacles into real opportunity for the future of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments, Dave Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jordan, I agree with you 100%. I think there's some real opportunities here, although I think there's a real caution that we must have, and I think some of the people that raise the issue of separating these out specifically for the enterprise funds are probably the most guilty of what I'm going to bring up. I think there's a lot of history here of the enterprise funds, and I'll use some terminology that's probably incorrect, but the fear of their cookie jar being raided. And whether that's being raided from a standpoint of when they accumulate some cash, and I'll speak from a personal experience when I served on the Civic Center board for many years, that whenever it seemed as though the Civic Center was able to accumulate cash on hand, and that was actually the name of the fund that we used was cash on hand, that was being gathered just exactly for the purpose that you've laid out, to be able to replace a roof or to be able to replace windows or doors or something that was a long-term capital project. Whenever those funds seemed to get to a size, and I remember a direct quote once when we were presenting before this very body looking at a 2012 project, that being told that you have an exorbitant amount of money on hand, you should spend that to build a new building rather than to keep up the building that you have. And I think that's the caution that I want to make sure, especially when you carve out the enterprise funds, is that if we're going to set this type of fund aside, we need to remember to leave our hands away from that fund, that it will have a purpose. And the purpose is not to set that enterprise over there and try to let it be completely autonomous unless we want it to be completely autonomous. And then we have to leave our hands away from it entirely. We can't have it both ways, and that's, I see us playing it back and forth as to serve our own purposes, and I'm very, I will continue to call that one as I see it being played back and forth, and I see it being played right now. So I want to make sure that we have that caution. I believe in as much as we can that whatever the law will allow us to do to create those funds, I think enterprise funds, that at least the one that I was involved with for so many years, did just that. Those monies were set aside, those projects were paid for from internally, and I don't think those funds exist quite today, probably more than anything because we have a 35-year-old facility that is getting a little broken down like most 35-year-old facilities do, and it's taken a lot more to keep it up. But I would hope that we can plan for those types of things for all of the buildings around town. I think the idea is a good one.
Further comments, Mayor?
Mr. Chairman, we actually found the state statute, which is very specific as far as the dollar amount you can collect even within enterprise funds. And that's there again, I think Mr. Green talked about that as the fact that, you know, government works, operates in under a different set of rules than what private enterprise funds. And I'm going to have Pauline read this to you because there again, it's very specific that we cannot accumulate large amounts of cash. And as Mr. Green mentioned, sometimes on the really large projects, your only really option is to go out and bond. With that, Pauline?
SDCL 921-14.1, and it's also 14.2 that's relevant. For some reason, I was thinking that there's a 5-year time period, and I found this one first. Capital outlay accumulations authorized for municipalities. Purposes included maximum accumulations. Governing body of a municipality may by resolution authorize the accumulation of funds for a period longer than 1 year for specific capital outlay purposes otherwise authorized by law. For the purpose of this section, capital outlay purposes means purposes which result in the acquisition of or additions to plant or equipment, including but not limited to expenditures for land, existing facilities, improvement of grounds, construction of facilities, additions to facilities, remodeling of facilities, or for the purchase of equipment. And for first-class municipalities, it says that the maximum capital outlay accumulations shall be as follows. The amount of the accumulation for all purposes may never exceed an amount equivalent to $4 per $1,000 of assessed value of all property within the municipality. So then if we go to 14.2, it says the resolution authorized by 921-14.1 shall be enacted by a 2/3 vote of the governing body and shall set forth clearly the purpose for the funds for which the funds are to be accumulated and the maximum amount that may be accumulated. The funds to be accumulated shall be expended within 60 months from the date of the resolution. If the specific purposes for which the funds are accumulated are deemed no longer necessary, these funds shall revert to the general fund.
Correct. Further discussion, Deb Hadcock.
I have an idea. A couple of years ago, I brought up contingencies, and I told people start looking at contingencies and what we spend contingencies on. There's your fund. There's a lot of slush fund, and I always call them slush funds because if you look, see what we spend those contingencies on those different funds. I'd like to know the total of all our contingencies, and I bet you'd be surprised. I went a couple of years ago. I looked back, and used to be, like I said, look and see what we're spending our contingencies on. I think if we had priority fund or call them priority funds, you could take down some of those contingencies into a priority fund based on what the council and the department heads and the mayor thought were a priority of that year or the next 2 years. I bet you can find some money in it. I say and encourage people to look because there's cash flow in the contingencies. Again, let's find out what the needs are instead of the wants, and it's right through contingency. Thank you.
Further comments, Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I appreciate the spirited debate because the one thing I've noticed that we have a tendency to do is find all the ways not to do something that we think is a good idea for the city here. It makes sense, I understand, state law has restrictions and things, but we have issues that we want to just like try to hide, you know. Alderman Davis has brought up the fact that some of these robbing from the cookie jar type things happen, and I understand and I appreciate that. And what we need to do is when we look at these and we identify these priorities, let's find a way to make sure that those things don't happen, so we give our employees in this city a reason to save, a reason to have efficiencies, a reason to make things happen. Like, you know, he mentioned the Civic Center. That's a 35-year-old building. It's going to have some 35-year-old issues, and what are we doing about it today? We're arguing about why we can't do it. Quite frankly, I don't want to hear why we can't do it anymore. I think Alderman Hadcock has come up with a lot of great ideas, so let's look at them. Let's move beyond why we can't do something and move on with how we can do something, because the reality is there's issues out there that we need to look at. The Civic Center buildings, the library buildings, all of our buildings basically are getting older, and we have to look at the factual matter of it. So let's just find a way to do it, and we'll figure out how to handle it later. We prioritize it out. I trust that our department heads have the ability to do that. I mean, we always claim to hire the best, so let's hold them accountable for doing the best. I don't have any issues with that. So, thank you.
Okay, further discussion, Bonnie Peterson.
Thanks. I wanted to, obviously all the discussion's been really good, and I think that's the benefit of having these extra meetings. And with Alderman Wah's proposal about possibly hiring someone, if the position and what the mayor said about also including purchasing is to look and try to do things smarter, and are there positions that can look at how we eventually, like positions that pay for themselves, to save money on energy use, save money or plan ahead. I hate to add FTEs, but at the same time, if it's positions that can really help ourselves, I think we need to do that. And then Alderwoman Hadcock saying that we do need these priorities, and I'm sure the department heads know what they are, but at the same time, it would be good to kind of have a master plan that everyone knows about, everyone's working toward, and then we do save away money, and it'd probably be good to find out how much money we are legally allowed to set aside, so at least we would know where what our limits are, and encourage people to be saving for a rainy day, because there's no doubt that we're still going to have plenty more of them amongst all the sunshine that our city receives. And anyway, I'm glad we've had the discussion. I don't know if we're getting very far, but I think we're at least giving the mayor and the department heads some instructions of what we'd like for them to look at. Thanks.
Further comments, Gary Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think two things we got to look out for. Two great ideas not coming down, but if we're going to prioritize, if we're going to start setting things up, I think from council to council, you got to hold to it. Just because we get an election, we get some new people on, sometimes we get enthused and we take away, like with Dave, we had over there, I was on the Civic Center board when that happened too. First, city council said, save some money, get it back, set it up. And after a couple of years, then all of months, next council that came around, they said, look, you got too much money, get rid of that, we're going to take it back. We have to have the political will to hold to it so staff knows we're going to be there. Two, if we're going to be hiring more people, getting a facilities manager sounds great. I think we'll give it a try on that, but I want justification, a yearly justification if we're going to keep it, and not hiring people for the sake of hiring people looking in. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, further comments? Is there any wish from this committee to do anything? Sam Quaker.
I would like to offer a motion to continue this to the next meeting, and as part of that continuation, ask the finance officer to identify what those cash amount limits are. And that will give us time to discuss this some more.
Okay, do we have a second on that motion? Okay, we have motion and a second. Further discussion. We'll go to Deb Hadcock first.
Thank you. Can we find out what each area of contingency and how much is in each of those areas and department, please?
You want to know the reserve card?
Yeah, basically, yeah. Do contingency and then do reserve. That way we know both and we know the difference. Thank you. I appreciate it, Ms. Pauling.
Okay, further comments on the motion?
Oh, I was just going to say that, not to what the legal limits are, but also where we are in comparison to those, if we have money set aside, so that.
Good questions.
You understand, Pauline, what all you need there? Okay. Any further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. You can put that back on the list, wherever we end up at. Okay. Next item is city attorney's office. I believe actually, I might be wrong, but I think go down a few items here, and I think the issue was a separate line item for hiring outside legal counsel and utilization of outside counsel, I believe, unless there was other discussion. Sam?
There was other discussion.
Okay.
Last month, at the February 28 meeting, there was a motion that passed the council to ask that we look into researching consulting firms for the purpose of preparing a Leahy-type report on the city attorney's office. So I was wondering if we could get an update of that.
Mayor, do you have any update at this time?
Yeah, so we'll have to go back and take a look at that. No,
Okay.
we don't have any update on that at this point.
That was on February 28th meeting?
Was that, and my apologies, I thought there was more of a general statement as far as all departments, or was it specifically on the city attorney's office?
It says here, the motion was made by Quaker, seconded by Hadcock, to request the mayor to direct staff to research consulting firms for the purpose of preparing a Leahy study style report on the city attorney's office and public works department. Hadcock encouraged the city to
Okay,
conduct.
so it was more than just the city attorney's office then? It was the engineering and, okay, yes. We're moving.
Can I say something?
But it probably wouldn't be the same consultant for
No.
both departments. Probably need a law firm to do the.
Sorry, Sam. Basically, we were looking at, how they went through and prioritized, remember what we were doing with the community resource and some other things that we had talked about? Just looking at each department and seeing what are the needs and what are the wants of those departments. And basically coming back with, just like we did with the report on the Leahy, do we need to do 81 of these things when we only need 15 and stuff like that? So sometimes people looking from the outside in can figure out basically what's the bottom line for us. So, but then there's the other thing also. I think consulting sometimes is good and they're put on shelves, and other times they're positive. So there's two sides to that as well. So I'll just listen to the discussion.
Okay, any further discussion on this item here? If not, Sam?
I'll offer a motion to continue this to the next meeting so we can get an update on the status of the research on those consulting firms.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to continue this to our next meeting. Further discussion on that motion? Being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Restructure of the garbage billing to encourage recycling. Bonnie?
But I think it also plays a part like what Jordan was talking about. I think it also plays a role in what Alderman Mason was talking about, is trying to get ahead of the front end of things, and so that we know there's going to be replacement costs for the landfill, and we know that the city saves money if we can reduce what the recycle, what goes into the landfill. How do we get the citizens, you know, what can we do? Is there a way to structure where they get a discount or something if they do recycle? What are the, and of course, this could just be discussions that the department heads need to have, but to come up with creative ideas or things to do so that people understand the role of when they recycle, that really eventually it saves the city money. If everyone would do it, we could do the cost. And so anyway, it's just part of a bigger global picture of how we can get ahead of the day-to-day management. And I know it's extremely hard to do that.
I see.
That was my idea when I brought that up.
Mr. Ellis just walked in, and I know we've kind of looked at and dealt with this before because it's a water billing, and then the garbage bill is actually added onto it. And I think there's limited things you can do with that, Robert, but I might be wrong. You want to explain it to us?
Sure. Am I on it now? There we go. There are a couple of fronts that we're looking at right now. One is we were actually looking at hiring a recycling coordinator and actually going out into the business community. We see that as the biggest market that needs to be tapped. Your bars where there's a lot of glass and cans and aluminum and things of that sort. Very similar to what we had done with the school district last year. Got into their kitchens and found there's a lot of tin, aluminum, and steel that was recycled. And that was the work from a part-time recycling coordinator that we had that actually broke into that market. So we're looking at hiring somebody full-time to work with all the businesses in town, and that would be a full-time job. And I think with our last solid waste committee meeting, the discussion was more hiring an outside consultant perhaps to do that. So that's something we're investigating right now. But one way or another, I would like to get somebody on either full-time or through consultant services to do that education. Get out and let those people know how much they can save by recycling on their bill, and then how much we can divert out of our waste stream, prevent from going to the landfill. I'm sorry? How do they save? Well, it pays for itself. I mean, last year we sold about $575,000 worth of recyclables. So there's a value to the material that we can pull out of the waste stream. There's also the value of extending the life of your landfill, not having to dig more dirt, buy more land, permit more space for landfill. So on a couple of different ways you can actually make money off of it. The other thing that we're looking at doing is part of the solid waste management plan actually called for a requirement that anybody that utilizes the landfill offer recycling services to their customers. Right now, our private haulers, the Fish, Red River, Sanders, Kiefer, they're not required to offer recycling services to their customers, but that was something that the management plan recommended and something we were wanting to tackle later this year.
Yes, I think that would be awesome because we need to have a fair playing field for everyone that's involved. And also, specifically, how could an individual business save money by recycling?
Well,
like say one of the bars.
What we've done in the past, we've actually met those business owners and went through, Jerry Wright has gone through dumpsters with them and pulled out everything that you can recycle and let them visually see this is the volume that if you recycled it, you wouldn't have to pay for this large of a container. You could get a smaller container, and that would translate into $50 a month, whatever that may be, in savings on your your garbage pickup. So we'll meet with people in the field and actually go through their garbage with them. Literally speaking, we will do that.
Any ideas being floated about how to structure rates for the homeowners, or so that if they actually participate in recycling, that they would get a lower bill?
Well, again, what that does come down to,
or charge more for those that don't. Either way.
Yeah, and we haven't looked at charging more for people that don't, but what we have done, again, is meeting with residents and try to educate them that right now, if you have a 95-gallon container, if you were to pull out everything from that waste stream that can be recycled, you could actually fit that into a 65-gallon container, which would mean a savings of $5 per month. So we've tried to do that with the residential customers as well, to demonstrate to them that there is savings. If you took everything out of there that could be recycled, you could get a smaller can each week for your pickup. And I think to really help us drive that home and spend the time on it that we need to, it's going to take, like I said, the FTE, a person to do that, and that would pay for that position. My thoughts are that the money we can generate on the sale of recyclables would pay for that FTE, or perhaps hiring a consultant to do that.
Well, thank you very much, Robert. And then, don't know
Further
if anyone
comments,
else-
Ron Weifenbach.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. Ellis, for not proposing some draconian style of recycling. One of the things, I'm working on a project now with some people in the community that are tearing down some buildings, and just by the sheer essence of communicating with one another, and maybe this position that you're looking at could be held out in the same type of manner. Just by communicating with other business people in the industry, they're going to end up recycling almost that entire building with the rubble and the sheet metal and those types of things. So, looking at going forwards in the future, if we maybe set up some sort of a communication line, that because there's a lot of times people will be looking for those types of materials, and if it's an opportune point, say somebody's turning on a building, which is a lot of rubble, they can connect with somebody who actually needs that rubble. In this case, there's a fellow who needs some rubble to do some fill, and there's some old ranchers that want to take the tin. So by the time they get done destructing this building, there's going to be just very little left of trash and garbage that will actually hit the landfill. So, and then I understand that. Thank you.
Further comments, Deb Hadcock.
Just an observation, I'm not seeing a lot of blue cans on the street. So they're easier, just to tell you the truth, Robert, we gotta offer some kind of incentive, or we've educated, you've done a great job at education. We're trying to save the landfill, but I'm telling you, I just don't see a lot of blue bins on the street. So I don't know what we need to do, but it's still not soaking into a lot of the citizens of Rapid City. Not everybody, because talking to Pauline, to tell the truth, she said her street is full of blue bins, and I think I probably have about one if we're lucky on our street. So there's got to be better incentives. Maybe we should have a contest between council members or something, who's got the most blue bins on their area or something. I mean, anything that would do some incentives to actually like save the landfill, program. You have any ideas?
Well, I'll tell you that we haven't done a very good job with education because we haven't had a person dedicated to doing that, and that's what it takes. I don't have time to go out and really hold people's hands all day long and show them how they can recycle and what it means to them from the environment side, the social side, the economic side. You need somebody that is their job all day long to do that, because that's the type of commitment you need if you want to see recycling go up. I can tell you right now, we get about 30% of the recyclables out there that get thrown away. The other 70% is going to the landfill. That's a very dismal percentage if you ask me.
Right.
And the only way we can turn that around is if we have a resource dedicated to educating the public, doing PRs, getting some spots on TV, working with business owners, drafting incentive policies. Maybe there's some type of a policy that we can team up with on the private side. There's something called Recycle Bank, where private haulers would actually measure the volume or the weight of your recyclables, and you would earn credits that would be redeemable at certain stores based on how much you recycle. So there are programs out there, but I need to have somebody do that. Right now, we just don't have the staff.
I appreciate that, because I guess they also, like your water treatment plant, they have a big message, or not a message on the government channel. That's a great way to get to the public. I didn't know if you had a recycling program or what that all means on there, but that's a great way to get it out to the public. But you're right, there needs to be more education, because like I said, and you know better, Robert, than the rest of us on how to get that done. And if it's hiring somebody else or getting more incentives moving, it's a good thing, because we need to save the landfill, and the less we put in there and the more recycle, the better off we are in the long run. Plus, in the long run, it also saves our city a lot more cash flow as well. So anyway, I think it was a good subject that Bonnie Peterson brought up, and thank you for the information.
Further comments? Jordan Mason.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask our Public Works Director, are there any of the current recyclable products that we are collecting right now that we may be processing that are economically profitable in the commercial market right now?
Shredder steel. I mean, that's the dollar-wise, that's the biggest we recycle that generates the largest profit. So that's actually that was a program that we started. People can just drop off old barbecues, bicycles, stuff like that. And then if you've ever been out to the MRF, you'll see there's a big pile of steel, and that's a voluntary drop-off. That's not something you can put in your dumpster that we pick up. But that's probably our biggest market. Shredder steel has the highest prices.
Thank you. I guess with that, I'm just wondering if it would be possible, like other states you see on the back of glass bottles, just like the one I have right now, that includes other states that offer, 5 cents or some nominal value for recycling. And I'm just wondering if there is an area where there's actually some, commercially viable profitability with one product, if you could take part of that profit to incentivize recycling in other products. And as Alderwoman Peterson mentioned, there's a long-term financial gain for the city by saving and spreading out the lifespan of the current landfill. So I guess I would just open it up for discussion further to see if monetary incentives may be something we would be willing to explore.
We'll go to Dave Davis.
Jordan, just a brief explanation. Having grown up in one of those states that has a 5-cent deposit, the state actually pays those retailers 6 cents to get it back. So it actually costs the state money to recycle. It's part of their general fund. They're funding it back to clean up the environment. So it is not a financially viable option, at least from that standpoint. But it is creating the end result, a very positive one. So.
Further comments will go to Sam Quaker.
Thank you. I think this has been a great discussion. I'd like to offer a motion to refer this to the Landfill Task Force for further discussion and bring a report back to the council in 90 days.
Solid Waste Committee, you mean?
That's what I meant. Solid Waste. Or Solid Waste Task Force.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second? Okay, we have a motion, a second, to take this to the Solid Waste Committee, and I'll come back with a recommendation to Public Works in 90 days. Further discussion on that motion? Being none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, motion carries. Next item is use of enterprise funds by other city departments. We'll go to Bonnie Peterson.
Oh, did you? Okay. I think it was, I don't see it on my list, but one of my ideas was why we don't, or I would like to see more working between the different departments, promoting each other, like the Civic Center, promoting the Journey, the Doll. Like when, say, for instance, they have one of those glass cages that's not rented or something, they could stick something in. No, yeah. And then we could see if anybody would come rescue the council member out of that as a fundraiser. But those kind of things, working together, I understand that, or another example I have is the parks, where they put out that summer flyer about the different activities that are available during the summer, that I don't believe they're including like activities like from, the Journey, the Doll, any other kind of things that could be kid-oriented, to go into those things. So I would just like to see more networking with each other and trying to figure out a way to synergize what each has to offer. And so anyway, that's why I brought it up, because And of course, I don't know if it's illegal or something to do that, but to work with each other and say, how could we, turn this all into a win-win for all of us. And anyways, that's why I brought it up. Thanks.
Further comments on this item? Jordan Mason.
Thank you, and thank you, Alderwoman Peterson, for bringing this up as well. I think there's definitely a lot of potential for this, and as some of the facilities in the city are looking at re-upping some of their contracts, I think it would be, and agreements, and looking at those, that maybe a better delineation of the roles and responsibilities that we would like those facilities to have within the city. By outlining those, as Alderwoman Hadcock had mentioned earlier, that you kind of create a list that we could start to see where some of those roles and responsibilities kind of overlap each other, and maybe we can start creating some real synergy in the city. Really think that's got some real viability to it, and glad that you brought it up. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion on this item? Being none, we'll go to the next item, which is separate line item for hiring outside legal counsel and utilization of outside counsel. Discussion on this item. Go to Jordan Mason.
Thank you. There's been some discussion about this, and one of the things that I guess I've always looked at is that I feel like the way that it's currently organized, we unfortunately, I feel, put our city attorney in a very tough situation. Just from an organizational standpoint, as far as I've been able to look at it, the mayor's office appoints our city attorney, and the city attorney is to provide legal counsel to not only the mayor, but also to the city council collectively as a whole. And right, wrong, or indifferent, there are times that part of the city council may disagree with the direction the mayor wants to go, and vice versa. And I worry that in those instances, whether there may be disagreements of how to get things done, that we kind of put a lot of pressure on our city attorney, and I would also think that it would be wise to get the possibility of getting two different legal opinions, or at least different interpretations on the same subject. I've never in my life found that having more information is ever a bad thing, and if we could get that, along with alleviating some of the organizational pressure that is currently placed on the city attorney, I see that as a win-win. And I guess I'd like to hear from my colleagues on this idea.
Further comments on this item? Mayor Hanks.
Thank you. Well, first of all, for those of you that have been around a while, you will certainly understand when I make this statement. If there is something that is inappropriate or not legal, whether I think it's a good idea or not, Jason Green would absolutely stand up and say, absolutely not. He is responsible not only to the mayor, to the city council, but also to all city employees and all taxpayers in this town. And his advice is based upon legal theory, not upon my opinion or the council's opinion. And that's the way it should be. When it comes to having the ability to get a second opinion, we've done that. We've asked the AG for an opinion quite often. And there's nothing wrong with that. When we need additional help as far as legal services, we go to outside counsel already. We currently already do that. And so, while I appreciate the discussion, I think the practice is already basically what has been put down here, and that is utilizing outside counsel when it's appropriate. We already do that.
Further comments will go to Sam Quaker.
Thank you. I think the larger issue here is the reporting structure of the city attorney's office. And it appears that under our current framework as an aldermanic form of government, we really have two options. One is to farm out the entire office at probably a great expense, or keep it as it is. And under a home rule charter, we would have different options. We would also have, I think this Leahy type report might come back with other options. But I remember, I've been in my 9th year on the council, and mayors come and go, councils come and go, and this issue has been around since the beginning. I remember Councilman Hanks and I having concerns about this in 2002, 2003. I remember at one point several council members brought forward a motion to try to, to look at doing a contract on the entire office with outside firms to try to ensure or establish more objectivity in the office, and that was in 2003. And I remember that discussion. So this isn't to single out any particular city attorney or any mayor or any council. This is something that we need to look into, and hopefully this Leahy type report will help us with that. But I think it is very important, and I have certainly seen this over the years, and I've experienced the uncomfortable nature of bringing an issue forward and not knowing whether it was being looked into or not. And I think having assurances that we have an objective city attorney's office that serves the entire community and the entire council and the mayor is very important. And I look forward to this Leahy type report as a vehicle to look into that issue. And the other option that we have, which we have done as a council in the past, is to send some folks to Pierre to lobby, like what we did with the airport situation 6 or 7 years ago, and try to get state law changed so that we have more flexibility. But there is a problem, and it does need to be addressed. And I think that this report might be a good way to explore the options. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments will go to Jordan Mason.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify a couple things right off the bat. I am in no way trying to point to our city attorney and make any sort of implication. What I'm hoping out of this is that I can start working for a better working environment for our city attorney's office and for the rest of the staff that go through him. I think that one of the things about our legal system as an adversarial system that I think is unique is that in an adversarial system, you always have two advocates representing the two different parties' position. So in any legal situation, as the mayor hinted at, with any legal theory, there's two sides and two ways of looking at it, always. And I guess what I'm looking at is there's a lot of instances that you can look at it more than one way. And I would always like to see more than one perspective if possible. I think that in the current situation, we are getting a solid legal interpretation, and we're getting one perspective. And I guess what I'm asking to look at here is there a possibility to get both perspectives? And I guess that's why I see this having merit. Additionally, having a legal counsel that is assigned to the city council and/or looking at going outside of the city, as the school board and some other city governments and municipalities have done, I think has merited in at least discussing. Because as our city grows, I think we are going to be looking at different issues as we grow, and we're going to be needing additional legal counsel as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comments, Ron Weitenbach.
Thank you, Mr. President. As we've gone through these budget talks, which have been a great exercise in debate, the one thing that I got to say is defense mechanisms. Once these defense mechanisms kick in, they seem to stymie the debate. I have some concerns, obviously, on this particular item when we talk about the view perspective of the taxpayers, how they're concerned when we issue some specific findings as attorney-client privilege, or when we, that keeps the transparency from the taxpayers. And so I'm not going to go on any farther with this due to the situation that I currently find myself in. But I definitely hope that this will be a debate item that comes up, because I think there's administrative opportunities here that would allow a freedom of and get us to the same point that we want to get to. being here on the council for 4 years, being put in particular situations, the council is represented as a whole, not as an individual person. Those are some issues that need to be taken up that are less political. So I'll talk about those. So there's opportunities here, and to look at this, and there's several people in our community that are way more intelligent on this matter than we are, that are willing to share their ideas. So I don't think we should just knock this one off and say it's not of importance. It sure is, but at some point I'm hoping to get the opportunity to really discuss this. But I just want to reserve that right now, because I don't want to sound like I'm sitting here filling everybody with political rhetoric. Thank you.
Further comments, Deb Hadcock.
Just a couple of things. Since I've been on here, a lot of times I see it's more the process and procedure in which we do City Hall, not always the lawyer or Jason's fault, but the process. Sometimes it's by law, we have to go into executive session and he has to keep things where he has to keep them. And then by process, sometimes you get thrown bombs up here, and then it's hard for him to answer a question when it's easier sometimes, instead of getting a second opinion, give him up straight or give him ahead of time those questions and let him look them up with full disclosure. Because sometimes when I'm up here and I'm watching Jason try to defend, he doesn't know every rule and regulation, but he can get back to you on it. And he does, again, have a second opinion. You can and you don't have to go to Jason Green. He's got a couple of lawyers in there, and I haven't taken always Jason Green, and he knows that, opinion. I went to Mike Shad or I went to somebody else in there just to see if they have the same opinion. So if we're talking performance-based budgeting, we're saying two different things here in one sense. If it's performance-based, look at the performance, and if you don't like the performance or you get a report, in a sense, if it's a Leahy report, it'll tell you. Because there's not just Jason Green in that office. There's code enforcement and other things that office is used for. Do I believe things and process and procedure on some of these things could be differently and done different? Yes, I do. But to point at a person, which we're not trying to, but he is the head of the office and he is the department head, I think we can, with our council members, change some of the process and procedure in which we do things, which sometimes will make it easier for his office and also be easier for us to get a second opinion on some of the things that maybe he doesn't know ahead of time, that he can get a second opinion on as well. So some of that's just working with your city attorney with a fair and just way of putting things. And some people, like Jordan, you know you do a lot of the pre-law and stuff, and I think you worked very well with Jason on learning some of these things. And some of the time, I don't agree with Jason, neither do you. But I think, like I said, if we're going to or hire an outside counsel and stuff like this, I'd have to look at, again, if the cost was worth it. We do it already. If it was the cost savings, do we really need, based on a report, do we really need a counsel consultant for every person? Do we need a finance officer consultant? Do we need a another community resource consultant for a council member? Because maybe everything that forgot his name, Barbier tells me it's not quite right, and I need a second opinion. So I'm understanding some of this, because I'm going to say again, I haven't agreed with Jason on every opinion he's gave me. I've disagreed. I fought. I went to state law. I changed some of the things on Jason, even Jason's mind, and he found out later, okay, Deb, you're right. So what I'm getting at is, if you want to change things, do by process and procedure. Look at what we have. Look at what he's doing. Give him some of the things that you feel that his process and procedure is not working for your council members. Give him a fair and just, ahead of time way of telling him, you know, I think you need somebody else besides you, in your opinion.
Further discussion, Jordan Mason.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate something one more time. I am in no way talking about a single individual. I am not here to look at even a single department. But as Alderman Hadcock has clearly pointed out, I am interested in the process, I am interested in the procedures, and more importantly, I'm interested in the overall global picture of how this all works, and that's what I'm interested in. I've enjoyed, and frankly, Jason Green has been a tremendous help, not only on the council, but also with some of my studies, and I can't frankly thank him enough. But I am looking at the way this city functions, and to lay out more of what I'm thinking about is our mayor, as our city continues to grow, is going to be doing a lot more in looking at, overseeing expenditures, looking at planning with the different department directors. And commonly he's going to be needing more and more legal advice as our city grows. So as that happens, and that's the head city attorney that is appointed by the mayor, is going to be involved more and more with the mayor's dealings as this city grows. It would be, in my mind, at least more efficient, and I appreciate the mention of looking at the cost-effective nature, exactly at what point will our city need to really look at this, because it could be now, it could be 10 years from now. But the fact of the matter is, I think there's also the issue that the city council is going to be looking at some of the broader issues as well, and that we may want to look at how we divide up those responsibilities within the city attorney. The other reason that I guess I also would look at the idea of outsourcing is that's an idea that is in some cities gone far beyond just city attorneys' offices. And in some areas, it's been extremely cost effective with some cities, and in other cities, there's other departments that we're finding out by watching by example that it's not the best idea to outsource those things. So I guess at least looking at that, back to the taxpayers, because that's what we're all here for, is to serve the taxpayers and the city as a whole. What is the best cost-effective answer here, and what's the most efficient answer? So to point out what the mayor said earlier, and I love the saying, this is about performance, and especially about the efficiency and the quality of service that we give the taxpayers. And I couldn't agree more. I think that's what we're really all here looking for, is how much can we give back to the taxpayers. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion on this item? Dave Davis.
Thank you, Mr. President. Try not to be redundant on some of the points that Councilperson Hadcock made, because she made a very strong point. These are not unique by any means to the city attorney's office. I think every department head in the city could have a different opinion from that of the mayor or that of the council. I mean, as I look across the back of the room, Chief, maybe I don't like the size or the color of the next fire truck you're going to buy, or Greta, there's a different set of books that we need to buy. Needless to say, are we going to hire a consultant for every department head in the city? I think we have a fiduciary responsibility to the taxpayer to utilize the money to the best of our ability, and that's that we hire the best people that we can. So somewhere along the line, we've got to get back to an issue of trust, that we've hired the best people and that we depend on them to give us the answers that we can depend on. I think we have some answer shopping going on here, and that's a personal opinion. But duplicating people, I don't know necessarily that that's the duplicating people and tax dollars is necessarily the best use of the tax dollars. Alderman Quaker brought up a point, and I looked back on the minutes of February 28th, and I looked in the motion that he had made, that to prepare, or to have the mayor's office research consulting firms for the purpose of preparing a Leahy-type study on the city attorney's office and the public works department. And I guess I was just wondering in particular if there were problems in those particular departments, or if there was a particular issue with those two department heads that we needed to go after them. Or I guess I looked at it that the Leahy-type study, the entire city at some point needs to be approached that way, because I saw a lot of benefit coming to second floor from a Leahy-type study. And I think every department head would agree, although it's painful none of us like to have someone looking over our shoulder and scrutinizing. We all grow from it. And I see a very strong benefit. I have to question when you start singling out a couple if there isn't another motive. But from a standpoint here, I think we have to be very honest with ourselves. When we start duplicating, I don't know that we're necessarily using the taxpayer's dollar in the best interest. So I hope that we can, in an ongoing basis, much like Alderman Mason had suggested earlier, that we put together an ongoing process of maintaining our structures. I think an ongoing process of doing a Leahy-type study throughout all of our departments is something that we also should look at funding, so that there is a continual observation and evaluation of how we run this city from an outside source, because we all get a little close to it. And that is something I think we should continue to look at as well.
Further comments, Mayor Hanks?
Thank you. And a matter of fact, if you remember the conversation when I first brought the Leahy project back, or the Leahy report back to the City Council, I know that during those discussions, I specifically stated that it was my intent to actually go through department by department in a systematic way. We could take up a department or two a year, but it makes no sense to try and do all 11 in one shot. But what I have to agree with Alderman Davis is the fact that it is certainly a worthy exercise to go through this. Just keep in mind that it makes more sense for me to take one or two a year. Trying to do more than that, quite honestly, will just create a lot of chaos within the structure of the city. So, but no, absolutely, that's one of those things that I know that I talked with the council, and that was my intention when we first hired Leahy. So, thank you.
Thank you. Further comments, Sam Quaker?
So it sounds like we're on the same page, that Public Works and the City Attorney's Office could be the next two departments, and then we could have those studies come back. I heard Alderman Davis mention a little bit ago. I just wanted to make sure I didn't misunderstand him. I mean, there isn't any particular goal of singling any particular department out, and if there was, then that's what the original Leahy report would have done, because that one, although it has been presented as a second floor review, it was a review of growth management and growth management alone. And that's why I wanted to see a broader review that included more of second floor, and including Public Works and City Attorney's Office is a very logical step. So I look forward to having that information come back forward, and I think what we can do is we can probably continue this item in conjunction with the other one and get an updated report later. Thank you.
Further comments, Mayor Hanks?
There we go. Just a correction. Leahy report was not just growth management. It looked at the relationship and the working structure between not only growth management, also with Public Works. If you look in the report, it's very specific that it looks. Now, I would agree that we could certainly take a lot more detailed look at the Public Works side of it, but the Leahy report was not specifically for growth management.
Okay, further comments, Dave Davis?
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to make a motion that, just to broaden the motion from February 28th, that takes it beyond just the City Attorney's Office and the Public Works Department, that would direct the mayor to have staff research consulting firms for the purpose of preparing a Leahy-type study to report on any and all departments at the mayor's discretion and the order in which it seems to fit, so that we're not singling out those two in particular right now.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Further motion, discussion on that motion. Gary Brown.
Thank you. Just a comment I want to make on, if we start these studies, I think one thing we're probably going to find too, Mayor, is as the city grows, as we pick up another 10, 15,000 population or that, we may be finding that we need to study whether or not this is the proper form of city government that we need. It's something we're going to have to be taking a look at also.
Okay, any further discussion on the motion on the floor? Aaron Costello.
I'm going to bring to light what Alderman Brown is alluding to. I hope I'm correct here. and that's that the city of Rapid City consider becoming a home rule city. I think it gives us a lot more power as a municipality to act as we see fit for our citizens. However, the process is lengthy, it is detailed, it is something that needs a major commitment from all the elected officials and also needs the backing of the citizens. So it would probably behoove us to at least start some education on that, to start getting some ideas out to the public on just what it details and what it enables us to do and how it is different from our current form of government. So, thank you.
Okay, any other discussion on this motion? Being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Next item is, do you have an overall problem with the budget presented by the mayor? Discussion on that item. Discussion on this item. Sam Quaker.
Thank you. I think the overall problem is, in a way, it's being addressed by having these monthly meetings, because it is very frustrating to come to budget meetings, be given a huge book or a huge file, and then being told that we need to act on it by a certain time, and then being labeled if we ask questions about it. So I think having these monthly meetings is a very good thing, and I think that reduces the overall problem. And so I think going forward, we should be having these meetings every month. And then to allude to maybe just a discussion on the processes is when there's questions that come up on this, if there can be research or information provided ahead of time that might help alleviate those questions, I think that would be good too. And I know that that's a two-way street, but one example would be the questions that Alderman Mason had regarding and Wah had regarding an ongoing fund for upgrade and maintenance, and regarding the cash amounts and the ceilings. If that information could be linked or provided to the council ahead of time, then that can really help with the communication process. So in summary, I think having these monthly meetings is a great thing. Thank you.
Just one comment regarding information. I know we've had the mayor's office send out, emails requesting if you had any questions or needed anything to please let them know. And I guess I'll just expound on it again as we go through this. When you get your agenda and you see that there is something on there that you need information on, don't hesitate to get a hold of Trudy in the mayor's office, and she'll get that information to everybody. So I know this last meeting, budget meeting, we probably didn't ask if there was anything that anybody needed, but I know we've done that numerous times. So further comments on this item? Sam, I'll say you still have the floor.
Well, I guess I want to be clear on my point. Is there was a line on here that said established ongoing fund for upgrade and maintenance of all city facilities. What we heard in the meeting was a presentation on the ceiling of cash amounts and a citation of case statutes or state statutes, and just having that information ahead of time. And Pauline, I'm not being critical. I'm saying that if we have that information ahead of time, it just helps the process flow better, and it just improves communication overall. Thank you.
I don't want to be argumentative either, but I mean, I don't disagree with those comments, but it's really hard for staff to kind of say, gee, I wonder what information they all want. So it's a lot easier to specify to them what they need versus them doing a lot of extra work getting information that no one wants. So, from now on, like I said, when you look at this agenda prior to these meetings, if you need any information, I know the staff would be more than happy to get what information you need, but it's a lot easier to do that than for them to try and guess what information they need to present to you. So further discussion on this item. Jordan.
Yes, the only comment I guess I would have is that I still do appreciate a lot of the progress, and I appreciate Alderman Quaker bringing up the benefit of having these ongoing budget hearings. But as we proceed forward, I guess I would also just note that I will still be keeping a critical eye on the debt, and I hope that we all do the same, especially in the long-term debt for the city. After the last update from Ms. Sumption and our finance officer, which was greatly appreciated, definitely brought to light the gravity of the amount of debt that we're facing. Thank you.
Further comments? Deb Hadcock.
Actually, with the budget presented, I think any of the problems that we've had or have had in the past with these meetings have come to light in a lot of ways. And because of council leadership and the department heads helping us out with moving these meetings ahead and getting this information to us, and council members being responsible and putting their needs or city's needs down on here that would help us with the budget process. This has been the best budget process year for me, just for information wise. I mean, it's been good in the past and we've done some really good things, but I'm seeing less problems with more of this communication that's going on, and that's the key, is you have council leadership and the mayor and the council members actually communicating on a budget process, which has made this a 100% better. And I'm one of those people, the more communication, the more debate, the more information, the better I become, and I think it helps all of us, including the staff and the mayor. So I'd like to give kudos to moving this forward to Mr. Kroger, Mr. Costello, and the mayor and the staff, because this is a lot of work in one sense, but it's good work in the end. So thank you very much. Again, there's always going to be problems, but this is the best way to solve it with communication and getting it done. So thank you very much.
Okay, is there any other comments regarding the overall budget that was presented? If not, we'll move down to moratorium on filling vacancies. Mayor, what is your procedure right now regarding filling vacancies?
We review every time we actually, before we post any position, we actually review it to make sure that that is a needed position.
Okay.
Obviously, there are certain positions that we do believe we do need to fill. If at this time we believe that they can be left vacant, they certainly are.
Okay, further comments? Sam?
I think, in all fairness, I think this question I'm about to ask probably will require some research. But I guess what we can do maybe is continue this for further discussion. But I would like to know regarding the last number of vacancies that we've had over the last year or so, how many we haven't filled versus how many we have. Do we know that information off the top of our heads, or
Mayor
should we
Hanks?
continue that?
We'll have to take a look at that, but I will tell you it really is a moving target. And the reason I say that is there's a good example is the fact that within growth management, there were a couple positions that were posted, but there was never anybody actually offered a position. When we actually, we'll have positions within the fire department or police department where they may remain open for 3 or 4 months because we go into a new hiring cycle, because we hire in groups within those different departments. So we'll try and get something together, but just please keep in mind is it's not going to be, it'll be more gray than black and white. It'll be a little bit of a moving target there, but we can certainly do that.
Okay.
I would just offer a motion to continue this in all fairness. I don't think it's...
What we can do is we can bring forward, very similar to what Kevin Thome used to do, is that is the report of the current vacancies within the city and how long they've been vacant.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I'll offer a motion to continue.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to continue this item to our next budget meeting. Discussion on that motion. Being none, all in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Next item would be to bring department director to the table when people are hired. Can anybody explain that one, put that one on the agenda?
Move to table. Or is that,
Have fun.
I'm sorry, I'll withdraw. I withdraw. Forget that motion.
I'm not willing to table something if we don't understand what it is. So if nobody's taking claim as to what it is and why it's there, why table it?
We'll just move on like we did all the rest of the items, I guess. I mean, that's kind of what we've been doing here if there's been no discussion, so, okay. Next item is where's the break between, we've already basically talked about that one. We're at the very beginning. City Attorney's Office, we talked about that. Facility, energy position, we talked about that. Income is there, we basically just had an update not too long ago. I don't know if anything's changed on the
I can give
sales
you
tax revenue.
Sales tax revenue. Of course, everybody saw that we were up 3.55% for fiscal year 2010. The last numbers we have, keep in mind, we're on the cash basis, which means we're typically a couple months behind. We do have both checks that have come in for January and through, and I'm at long-term memory, I know this one, 5.91% is what we're up for January. So we saw a dramatic increase in sales tax. Now, there again, for the month of January, I always caution people that is a snapshot in time. We need to continue to look at the long-term trends, and the long-term trends have been trending up, and January trended very well. So, with that, like I say, just shy of 6%.
Like any other comments?
So that, just to make sure we're on the same page, that 3.55%, that's 2010 over 2009.
That is correct.
And so when you compare to 2008, which is for our budget process, we're actually just up how much?
Right.
Can you tell us what that number is?
Sure. We were up just a little bit. Now, keep in mind, for fiscal year 2010, we were at 1 plus 1, is that correct? And for fiscal year 2011, if you remember, we used no growth whatsoever. We went back to the 2009 actual revenue number, and that's the dollar amount that we were projecting. So for going into fiscal year 2011, we're actually sitting in pretty good shape because we can not only add the 3.5% increase for 2010 that we didn't anticipate, but any increase in the fiscal year 2011 above that zero growth will be unanticipated cash. So going into fiscal year 2011, unless it actually takes a complete reversal, we'll actually be sitting in a lot better shape, and actually in very good shape, because we didn't anticipate any growth in fiscal year 2011. If you remember, with the city council support, we passed the most conservative budget in our city's history. We said we're going to use the worst numbers we've had in decades, and that was the fiscal year 2009 actual numbers, and we added no growth to it at all. And so any growth that we get in fiscal year 2010, plus anything that we get in 2011, is all unanticipated revenue.
Okay, Bonnie.
I'm glad to hear that we're trending upward, and I just want to, I would like to see us have this coming budget to be also one of the most conservative budgets that we've seen, because we've got to start chipping away at the growth of government. And also, I have another comment, since we're under the staff portion of this, was that I'm wondering if we have these future budget meetings, I was wondering if we could put a revote about, or if we could have this on the night of council meetings, so that we don't, if we could start like at 5 or 5:30 on the night of council, to have this meeting prior to the regular council, so that we don't have to have all of the extra staff here on another night. I'm not sure who gets paid extra, but I'm sure with spring coming and gardens needing to be done, people like to get some dirt work in. And so I just thought I would throw that out. I know that we do it on this fourth Monday, but
I disagree. Monday night football's over with. There's not much to do on a Monday night.
So anyway, I just don't know if we could possibly add it on to, I mean, it makes for a long night, but fact is we're coming over here anyway before a regular council meeting. And so I was just going to throw that out.
I mean, that's the wish of the council. You know, if they want to make a change, I don't have any problem with that. You know, as we move forward, we had quite a list to go through, and we tried to schedule it just for 2 hours. But you know, as we move forward, chances are there will not be as many things probably to discuss or that need to be discussed on a monthly budget hearing meeting. I don't know, maybe there might be, but that when we have them is up to the council.
Well, I just didn't know if there's any support for adding it on to the regular budget or the regular council night, or if we wanted to keep having a separate meeting. So
I guess my own personal opinion would be is, you know, if our council meetings were like they have been the last couple times, I wouldn't have a problem with that. But to start at 5 and end at 2, 3 in the morning, after working a full 8-hour day, I have a problem with. So with that, other comments? Gary, you had something?
Just a comment, I think, Mr. Chairman, just a comment relative to one thing that Peterson had to say, and that's keeping at zero growth budgets and keeping like what we've done in the past. I may take a little different stance on that. I'm getting more concerned maybe in the lack of training, and that some of our people have been cut out of getting with these zero growth budgets and that. I want to look at that next time to see what they need. Also, we've been probably patching together a lot of equipment. I want to make sure that we're not getting too far behind on some of that. So just to let you know, I'm not probably going to be a great fan of a total zero budget. I want to hear from staff just where we might need to maybe spend just a little bit more money what we have in the past. And they're probably here, my guess, my gut says, more to protect their own sheds than they are worrying about what they're going to be doing tonight. Thank you.
Mayor Hanks.
Thank you. One of the things to keep in mind is the fact that because our sales tax was up over 3.5%, the employees are entitled to 1.25% increase in the raising of the entire matrix, excuse me, as of July 1st. So keep that in mind that there is going to be some additional salary expenses there. So, and when we talk about no growth, please keep in mind, you know, we've had 3 years of no growth budget. We also cut the budget by 5.2% last year. I mean, we took it to the bone last year because of the recession. So will it be extremely conservative? You bet it will. Will it be no growth? We'll try. But on the other hand, how long can the city continue to provide services at the level that is expected by the public at the same dollar amount? I mean, that becomes a dilemma. Eventually, what will end up happening is we're going to have to start cutting back on services. You know, after 3 years of no growth, and then, you know, with that 5.2% cut, you know, I think that's something we all be proud of. But keep in mind, I know it's very fashionable to talk about continuing to cut, but the city of Rapid City was what I will consider uncharacteristically fashionable because we were cutting budgets and holding the line on budgets before other governmental entities were. That's the reason why you don't see the city of Rapid City on the front page of the Rapid City Journal talking about our budget crisis. We don't have a budget crisis. We don't have the problem that the state does. They were $120 million in the hole. We don't have trillions of dollars worth of problems like the feds do. And that's because collectively we've all been very, very conservative, and we have been over the last 3 or 4 years.
Any other discussion on the sales tax revenue? Sam?
Thank you, and I appreciate the comments regarding the budget. I think there's probably more discussion that needs to be had on that, but I think it's important to have the full picture. That when we have a cost shifting or changes that occurs in the budget that affects other funds, that it be presented in the big picture. And you know, Alderman Mason mentioned the debt concern earlier tonight, and that's something that I'd like to hear more about at a future meeting. Is it a concern or not? Certainly sounds like a concern, and I'd like to thank him for bringing that forward. But that's something that we need to discuss when we talk about the all-encompassing picture of our revenue and our budget. Thank you.
Any other discussion on the sales tax revenue? Being none, we'll take one more, then we'll call it an evening here. Enterprise fund income statements. Mayor? Pauline?
We're moving forward and hopefully have something shortly as far as the reporting process. Pauline, do you know how long? I would hope within the next 30 days.
Yeah, we're trying to wrap up the annual report in my office first, and then we'll start getting those monthly reports out.
Okay.
Second.
What was the motion? Okay, your motion was to continue? Okay. Got a motion to continue this item to our next budget hearing meeting. All in favor say aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Deb Hadcock and then Bonnie. Charlene, our next budget meeting is, okay, April 25th. Schedule at 5:30. Entertain a motion to adjourn if there's no other items that we need to discuss. Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. Oh, okay. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carries. Meeting adjourned.
Did I miss anything?